We had been looking forward to our camping trip to Franconia Notch in New Hampshire for months. It was me, my wife, and our 3 kids packed into the SUV, ready for a full week of hiking, swimming, and just being outside. The place looked like something out of a nature magazine. Tall pine trees, crystal clear rivers, and clean, cool air that made you want to breathe deeper. We had a solid routine going by the second day. Hike during the day, eat and unwind by the fire at night. We visited the basin, hiked parts of the Ridge Trail, and stopped by every scenic spot we could find. My kids were filthy from playing in the dirt and jumping into streams, but they were happy, and that's all that mattered to me. That second night, we got back to camp late after a long day on the trail. Everyone was wiped out, but we still had to eat, and the kids were starving. I threw together a quick meal on the camp stove while my wife helped the little ones clean up. After dinner, we all pitched in to get the campsite tidy before bed. We were staying at one of those semi-rustic campgrounds. There were outhouses, a water pump, and not much else. No power, no cell service. You really had to be prepared. I had just finished scrubbing the last pan with some river water and was leaning into the trunk to stow our cooler when something caught my eye at the edge of the trees. A large shadow moved, slow and deliberate. At first I thought it was a dog, but when it stepped into the glow of our lantern, my heart just stopped. It was a black bear, a big one, way bigger than I ever imagined I'd see that close. He wasn't 10 feet away from me, right next to our picnic table, sniffing around the ground where my youngest had dropped part of her hot dog earlier. I froze. I could have reached out and touched his nose. That's how close he was. I had always told myself I'd stay calm in a situation like that, but my brain went blank for a second. My wife and kids were zipped up in the tent behind me. If this thing charged, there was nothing between them and it but me. I had a big metal spoon in my hand from the dishes. It was all I had. I slowly bent down, grabbed the nearest pot, and smacked it with the spoon as hard as I could, right in front of the bear's face. The sound was deafening in the quiet night, just this harsh metal-on-metal clang that echoed through the trees. The bear jerked back, paused for a second like he was weighing his options, then took off into the woods. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to black out. I barely had time to breathe before he came back. Not even 2 minutes later. Same path, same sniffing around the table. I did it again. Another hard bang, 2 quick hits this time, and I stepped toward him as I hit the pot. That time he took off deeper and didn't come back. I kept my eyes glued to the tree line for a long while after that, just waiting. My hands were shaking. That bear had zero fear. If I hadn't been out there doing dishes at that exact moment, he probably would have torn through everything we had. I didn't tell my kids about it until the next day. No point in scaring them. We stayed the rest of the week, and things mostly went back to normal, but that bear moment stuck with me. I'd say it was the second scariest part of the whole trip. The number 1 came on our last night. It was the 4th of July. The weather all day had been beautiful, sunny, high 80s, with barely a cloud in the sky. We went swimming, did some more light hiking, grilled hot dogs again, and then drove into town to watch the fireworks. They had a great display set up near a lake, and it was one of those perfect small-town celebrations. Everyone clapping, kids waving glow sticks, lawn chairs all over the place. We headed back to the campground around 10 p.m., still buzzing from the day. Everyone passed out not long after we got back. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of thunder. Not far-off rumbles either, this was right on top of us. I unzipped the tent and stepped out into a nightmare. Rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind had picked up fast. The fly on the tent was starting to lift at the corners, and rain was pushing under it, soaking the edges of the floor. My oldest son woke up and helped me hold down the fly while I grabbed a tarp from the car. We tried to throw it over the top, but the wind was so strong it ripped it right out of our hands twice. We finally got it anchored with some rocks and rope, but by then we were soaked and shivering. And then the branches started falling. Not twigs, full limbs snapping and crashing all over the campground. I saw one bounce off a car roof not 20 feet from us. Tall pines were bending so low I thought they were going to snap in half. I saw tents literally lift up and fly into the trees like they were made of paper. People were throwing their stuff into their cars and driving off. Headlights flashed through the trees, tires spinning in the mud. Some left their tents behind. Some didn't even bother with their gear at all. We couldn't leave. There was no way I was leaving all our stuff behind, not 14 hours from home. And trying to pack up in that storm would have been just as dangerous. Trees were swaying hard, mud was pooling everywhere, and visibility was maybe 10 feet. I sat in the car with my family after we made sure the tent was as stable as it could be. I didn't sleep at all. Every gust of wind felt like it might be the one that drops a tree on us. My hands gripped the steering wheel the whole time. At one point, I actually put the car in drive, ready to floor it if something started coming down on us. By morning, it looked like a war zone. Tree limbs everywhere, tents shredded, some flattened. The gravel roads were covered in debris, and a few power poles were down near the entrance. The campground staff were already out with chainsaws trying to clear things. A couple of cars were dented badly, and I heard someone say a guy down by the lower loop had a tree fall on the corner of his camper. We packed up slow and careful that morning. I was running on zero sleep, my clothes were still damp, and I was starting to feel the weight of the whole week hit me. My wife offered to drive, but I didn't trust anyone else behind the wheel in my state of mind. I white-knuckled the steering wheel through New Hampshire, then Vermont, barely keeping my eyes open. Around midday, we found a little family-run farm store off a rural road, one of those places with goats out front and jam for sale inside. My wife and kids went inside to grab snacks and stretch their legs. I stayed in the car and just closed my eyes. It wasn't sleep really, more like slipping in and out of consciousness for half an hour. It helped, a little. The rest of the drive was a blur. 14 hours of trying not to let my exhaustion take over, replaying the bear in my head, the storm, the way those tents lifted like they weighed nothing. The weird thing is, it's one of my favorite memories now. Everything went wrong, but we came out of it safe. It reminded me how fragile everything is. One storm, one animal, and things can flip fast. But at the time, I was scared in a way I hadn't been since I was a kid. That kind of fear where you don't know what's coming next, but you have to keep moving because you're the one holding it together for everyone else. I don't think I'll ever forget the sound of that wind through those trees, or the way that Bear looked at me before he ran off. I wouldn't trade the experience for anything, but I don't think I ever want to relive it either. When I was around 13, my family took a weekend camping trip not too far from where we lived. It wasn't anything fancy, just a couple of tents, some folding chairs, a cooler full of sandwiches and drinks, and a small fire pit. My parents loved to do stuff like this. Get away from the noise, spend time outdoors, no cell service, no distractions. My younger sister was there too, and my older cousin came along that time, which was cool because it made things feel a bit more exciting. I remember the air was chilly at night, but not freezing. It was one of those late spring weekends where the days were warm enough to wear t-shirts, but the nights still held onto a little bite in the air. That second night of the trip is the one I'll never forget. We had spent the day hiking a nearby trail. I was exhausted by the time we came back. My legs were sore, and I remember my shoes had so much dirt in them it felt like I was walking with tiny rocks in there. We had a late dinner, hot dogs, chips, and some canned beans, and sat around the fire for a bit. My dad always liked to poke the fire with a stick and throw in extra kindling to make it flare up every now and then. The fire was big that night, bigger than usual. I remember my mom saying something about keeping it down because the wind had picked up a bit, but nobody really thought anything of it. The fire was in a small pit surrounded by rocks. It felt safe enough. Eventually, everyone started turning in for the night. My sister and cousin were already curled up in their sleeping bags inside the tent, and I followed not long after. I don't know how long I was asleep, but at some point in the middle of the night, I woke up. No sound woke me up, no movement. I just suddenly opened my eyes. The tent was quiet. My sister was breathing softly beside me, and the fabric of the tent made that soft, fluttering noise from the breeze. For some reason, I sat up and looked out through the small screen window on the tent. From where I was lying, I had a pretty clear view of the fire. It was still burning, not wildly, but the flames were high enough to notice. The wood we had put in earlier must have still been going strong. The orange light from the fire danced on the nearby trees, casting strange shadows that moved and shifted with the flames. I couldn't explain what I was feeling at that moment. It wasn't fear yet, but something was off. I just kept watching the fire, like I was waiting for something. And then I saw it. A man, at least I think it was a man, walked into the light of the fire. He didn't come from the woods, not that I saw. One moment the fire was alone, the next he was standing right there beside it. His clothes were dark and loose, and he moved slowly, like he was in no rush. He wasn't carrying anything. He didn't look around. He didn't seem to notice the tents or our chairs or the cooler or any of our stuff. Just the fire. He stared into it for a second, then leaned down and picked up one of the burning logs from the pit. I couldn't move. My entire body felt frozen. Not like I was paralyzed, just locked in. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't take my eyes off of him. He lifted the log like it weighed nothing, and it was on fire. I saw the flames licking up around it, bright and red and yellow, and some embers fell to the ground near his feet, but he didn't react. He didn't flinch. He just raised it up slowly, rested one end of it on his shoulder like a bag of tools or a piece of wood you'd carry to a shed, and then turned. He walked off in the same way he came, slow, calm, not looking around, not hiding, just walking straight ahead into the trees. The weirdest part? The fire started dying almost immediately after he left. The flames got smaller, the wood settled, and the crackling faded. I just sat there, still frozen, still staring. I must have sat there for 10, maybe 15 minutes, wide awake, not moving a muscle. At some point, I fell asleep again, not sure how. I didn't even realize I had until morning came and I heard the sound of zippers and footsteps and birds. I got out of the tent and looked around. Everything seemed normal. My parents were setting up for breakfast. My cousin was brushing her teeth at the water spigot. But then I walked over to the fire pit. The ash was still warm, but not hot. There were blackened pieces of wood and some half-burned sticks scattered around. But one of the bigger logs from the night before was missing. I walked around the pit slowly, not saying anything. Then I noticed something that made my stomach feel cold. Near the back of the fire pit, about 2 feet away, were 3 small cans. 2 of them were half-empty lighter fluid containers, and one was a small metal gas can. My dad had used them the first night to help start the fire when the wood was damp, but I remember him setting them far away from the fire afterward. No one had moved them closer. They were way too close now. I even remember thinking how weird it was that they didn't catch or melt from the heat. If the fire had gotten any bigger, if even one log had rolled just a bit in their direction, it could have been a disaster. The slightest change in the wind, a few sparks, and we could have had a fire spreading through the dry leaves and pine needles around our site. That's when it hit me. What if the man, the figure, whatever it was, what if he had taken that log on purpose? What if it wasn't random? I didn't tell anyone about what I saw. Not that morning, not on the drive back, not even years later. Every time I thought about saying it out loud, the words just felt too strange. I didn't want to sound like I was making it up. I even convinced myself that maybe I was half asleep and imagined the whole thing, that it was just some weird dream, mixed with the shadows and the firelight. But I never forgot the way it looked. The way the man walked up like he belonged there. The way he held the burning log like it didn't hurt him. The way the fire seemed to shrink the second he walked away with it. Even now, as an adult, when I think back to that night, it gives me chills. I've gone over every possible explanation. Maybe it was someone camping nearby, maybe he was drunk or high, maybe he was just some crazy guy, but there were no other campers for at least a mile in any direction. We checked the map, and nobody else reported anything weird that weekend. No one saw anything, no one heard anything, and besides, who picks up a flaming log with their bare hands, carries it on their shoulder, and walks away like it's nothing? There's a part of me that still wonders if he saved our lives. If by taking that log away, he prevented the fire from growing too big. If he hadn't, maybe it would have tipped or rolled toward the gas can. Maybe the whole site would have gone up in flames. Maybe we would have all been asleep when it happened. It's the not knowing that bothers me the most. I've told myself again and again that there's a rational answer, that there has to be. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that maybe there are things that happen out there. Out in the middle of nowhere, where it's quiet and dark and there are no streetlights or fences or people watching. Things that don't follow the rules we're used to. Things we can't explain. And maybe that night, one of those things saw a fire getting too big, too close to something dangerous. And maybe, just maybe, it decided to step in. I never went back to that same campsite. Not because I was scared of what I saw, but because I feel like I wasn't supposed to see it in the first place. Like it was a one-time thing, something meant to happen quietly and unseen. And I just happened to wake up at the wrong moment and look out at the right time. Or maybe the right moment. I still don't know. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend. My fiancé and I had been planning a quiet camping trip for months. Just the two of us and our dog. Away from work and the endless noise of city life. We picked a fairly remote campground in Arkansas, tucked deep into the forest about an hour from the nearest town. The place was peaceful. There were only about 5 or 6 other campers scattered across the area. You could barely see them through the trees, and the only real signs of others being around were distant murmurs of laughter and the occasional flicker of campfires at night. We set up our tent near the edge of the small lake that sat in the middle of the campground. It was a nice spot, quiet, shaded, and just a short walk to the communal fire pits and grill stands. The sun was starting to dip behind the tree line, casting long shadows across the ground as we prepped our little dinner. My fiancé was cutting vegetables while I handled the grill, flipping a couple burgers and toasting some buns. The air smelled like pine and charcoal, and for once we both felt completely at ease. Then, just as I reached over to grab the tongs, we heard it. A man's voice yelling, loud and panicked. It wasn't the kind of playful yell you hear from drunk campers messing around. It was desperate, a raw, cracked kind of scream that stopped everything cold. I froze and looked at my fiancé, who had already dropped the knife and was staring wide-eyed in the direction the sound came from. It was off to the left, maybe 2 or 3 camp spots over. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't even think to grab a flashlight or my phone. The ground was uneven, roots sticking out of the dirt, pine needles crunching under my feet as I rushed toward the sound. When I got there, I stopped so fast I nearly fell over. A man, probably in his late 40s, was standing near a picnic table, his face twisted in pain. Blood was pouring down his leg, pooling around his ankle, soaking into the dry dirt like water into a sponge. His shorts were stained dark red. Took me a second to even register what I was looking at. He was wobbling on one foot, clutching a blood-soaked towel to his ankle, but it wasn't doing much. Blood was still spurting out in pulses, and it hit me all at once. He'd nicked an artery. It was like a dam fountain, every beat of his heart pushing more blood out onto the ground. My fiancé caught up to me just seconds later, and thank God for that, because I was already starting to feel faint. Blood has always messed with me. I can't even watch medical shows without turning green. But this was real, and it smelled like metal and dirt and something sharp that made the back of my throat burn. She took over instantly, grabbing the towel, applying pressure, lifting his leg onto the bench to get it elevated. She was calm, focused. I remember seeing her hands shaking just slightly, but she didn't stop. I snapped out of it and ran back to our site as fast as I could to grab my phone. But of course, no signal. Nothing. Just the dead, empty screen of no service staring back at me while this guy was losing more blood by the second. I knew the nearest hospital was about 20 miles away. I had seen it on the map when we were researching the campground. It was a small place, more of a local clinic than a real hospital, but it was something. I had maybe half a second to decide what to do. Wait for an ambulance that might take 40 minutes to even get here? Or throw this guy into his truck and drive? I jumped into action. I found his keys on the picnic table, shouted for my fiancé to keep pressure on the leg, and ran around to start his truck. He had a big, older model pickup. I helped him hobble over, one arm around my shoulder, the other gripping the door. Blood smeared onto my clothes, hot and slick and heavy smelling. The second he was inside, I slammed the door shut, jumped into the driver's seat, and took off. I didn't care about the speed limits. The road out was narrow and full of sharp turns, but I didn't lift my foot off the gas. The truck roared, tires grinding gravel as I barreled down the forest road. I kept looking over at him. His head leaned back, eyes closed, muttering something I couldn't make out. His lips were pale. His breathing got slower. His fingers were twitching. I kept talking to him, even though I didn't know if he could hear me, just saying anything to keep him awake. The whole cab smelled like iron and sweat, and every time we hit a bump, I saw more blood pooling under the seat. I don't know how I didn't throw up. I reached the hospital in 12 minutes flat. I still don't know how I managed that. I don't remember most of the turns, just the rising panic and the sharp focus of adrenaline that kept me from passing out. I screeched into the emergency entrance and slammed the horn until someone came out. Nurses rushed out with a wheelchair and hauled him out. As they opened the passenger door, I saw a puddle of blood spill out onto the pavement, thick and dark. One of them shouted for more help and they disappeared through the sliding glass doors. I sat in the truck for a while after that, breathing like I'd run a marathon. My hands were shaking, blood on my shirt, my legs, even on my face. I hadn't even realized he'd been gripping my arm the whole way and left deep red prints where his fingers had been. My fiancée arrived about 30 minutes later in our own car. She had stayed behind with his dog, a nervous-looking mutt that hadn't stopped pacing since the whole thing started. We spoke to the hospital staff and explained what happened, answered a few questions, and then left. They said he was lucky. If we hadn't gotten him there when we did, he would have bled out. When we got back to the campground, the adrenaline finally wore off. I sat down by the fire pit and stared into the flames, trying to get the image of all that blood out of my head. The dog wouldn't leave our side, like he knew we had helped his owner. We fed him and kept him close, even unzipped the tent to let him sleep near us that night. None of us got much sleep. Around 10:30 that night, headlights cut through the darkness. I stood up, half expecting it to be a ranger or someone checking in. But it was him, the man we had driven to the hospital. He stepped out of the truck slowly, a fresh bandage wrapped tight around his ankle. He limped toward us with 18 stitches and a look that said everything. The doctor told him point blank, if we'd waited for help, he would have died. He thanked us without saying anything, just nodded, sat beside the fire for a few minutes, and then called his dog over and went back to his site. We didn't talk much after that. I think we were all just too drained. That night was quiet, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the blood. The way it pulsed out, the way he started fading in the truck, the weight of his body as I tried to keep him upright. Stuck with me. We left the next morning, cutting the trip short. We didn't say goodbye to anyone, just packed up and drove in silence for a long time. I still think about that night sometimes. About how fast something can go from peaceful to life or death. About how a quiet camping trip turned into a race against time. It didn't feel real until weeks later when I was still scrubbing faint brown-red stains off the truck floor. It wasn't a ghost story or some wild animal encounter. Just real life, real people, real blood. And the moment you realize how close someone came to dying right in front of you. We went out there to get away from everything. We came back with a memory that I'll never be able to shake. I had never been dispersed camping before this trip, but my girlfriend had done it a few times and convinced me it would be fun. If you don't know what that is, it's basically camping with absolutely no amenities. No bathrooms, no running water, no picnic tables, no trash bins. Just wilderness. It's free and you're on your own. You're supposed to camp at least 100 to 200 feet away from any water source, and when you need to go to the bathroom, you dig a hole at a certain depth and bury your waste. She kept saying how peaceful and raw the experience is, and I was in the mood to get out of the city, so I agreed. We left on a Friday morning and drove several hours out to this forested area in the mountains. It was pretty remote. The road was mostly dirt for the last stretch, and I started losing signal about 10 miles out. The campsite wasn't marked or anything. We just found a clearing not far from a dry creek bed and set up the tent. The sun was shining, and there wasn't a soul in sight. I had to admit it was beautiful. The trees stretched high and wide around us, and the air smelled like pine and cold earth. There were a few patches of snow in the shadows, but most of it had melted. My girlfriend had a checklist for all the gear, so I didn't worry much about what we packed. She said she had a new collapsible shovel and already packed it in the crate with the cooking gear, so I didn't bother to double-check. That night, the temperature dropped fast. It was in the 30s and the wind didn't let up at all. I packed warm clothes, but not enough layers. We had a small campfire going until around 10 p.m. Then we crawled into the sleeping bags and passed out. The cold makes you tired fast. I fell asleep to the sound of trees creaking and the wind pushing against the sides of the tent. Around 2 a.m., I woke up with a sudden, horrible cramping in my stomach, the kind where you don't get any warning. Just 1 second you're asleep and the next it's full-blown panic. I knew instantly that I was about to have a serious problem. My stomach was turning itself inside out, and I felt this growing, twisting pressure that told me I had minutes, maybe seconds, before it was too late. I sat up fast and tried to stay calm, but that only made things worse. My heart was pounding, and the cold air inside the tent made my skin feel like it was burning. I tried to move slowly, quietly, but every second counted. I shook my girlfriend awake to ask her where she put the shovel. I didn't want to wake her, but I had no idea where the thing was and I needed it now. She told me it was in the crate by the back of the car. I grabbed my flashlight and scrambled out of the tent in just my thermals, socks barely pulled on, and boots half-laced. The cold hit me like a slap in the face. The wind made my eyes water instantly, and my breath came out in thick clouds. I ran to the crate near the car and started digging through it like a maniac, tossing aside pots, pans, foil, a fuel canister, anything that wasn't the damn shovel. Every second felt like a lifetime. My body was betraying me, and the pain was getting unbearable. I started sweating even though I was freezing. Finally, I found something that looked like a shovel. Not the one I'd expected, though. It was some cheap-looking plastic trowel, short as hell and flimsy. I didn't care. I took off running toward a patch of trees maybe 30 feet from the tent, away from any water source, and started digging as fast as I could. But the ground was like concrete. Frozen dirt, rocks, dry roots. The shovel bent on the first try. I knelt down and started clawing at the ground with both hands, barely able to see what I was doing with the flashlight tucked under my arm. My fingers went numb. The wind howled around me, and I could feel it cutting through my thin clothes like knives. I got a shallow hole scratched out, maybe 4 inches deep. Not enough, but it was all I had. I yanked my shorts down just in time. I barely made it. Barely. Even then, it got messy. The relief was instant, but so was the realization that I had absolutely nothing to wipe with. I had left the toilet paper in the tent. It was one of those things I thought about while sprinting away from the crate, but I figured I'd have time to run back if I needed to. I didn't. I looked down at my hands, already coated with dirt and mud. I had no choice. I used my hand. Just one quick swipe to get the worst of it off. It was horrible. My nails were already packed with frozen dirt, and the texture made me want to vomit again. I tried to clean my hand in the snow, but there wasn't much left on the ground. I ended up walking back to the tent, holding my hand away from my body, shaking from the cold, my insides hollow and raw. Back near the tent, I grabbed one of our water jugs and poured it on my hand and lower back, scrubbing with the coldest water I've ever felt in my life. I was gasping and cursing under my breath the whole time. I used some spare socks to dry off and tossed them into a trash bag. I stood there for a second in the dark, just completely drained. The wind was quieter now, and I could hear my girlfriend snoring faintly from inside the tent. When I finally crawled back into the sleeping bag, I was too cold and wired to fall asleep again. I laid there for at least an hour, still feeling the cramps in my stomach, waiting for round 2, but it never came. Eventually, I drifted off. The next morning, I felt like I'd been through a war. My hands were scraped and raw. My legs were still trembling. The shovel I'd used was on the ground next to the crate, and I pointed at it, telling my girlfriend that it had barely worked and almost made me shit myself. She looked confused. Then she walked over, picked up a black pouch I'd tossed aside the night before without opening, and unzipped it. Inside was the actual shovel. A nice one. Solid metal, collapsible, sharp edges, perfect for digging even frozen ground. I'd thrown it aside in my panic, not realizing what it was. I just stood there staring at it. I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. The rest of the trip went fine, but that night kind of stuck with me. There was no supernatural moment, no creature in the woods, no stranger watching us from the trees. Just a raw, miserable reminder that sometimes the scariest moments are when your body turns against you and you're alone in the middle of nowhere trying to dig a hole in the dark before it's too late. I learned 2 things. Always check the gear yourself, and never trust your stomach after eating dehydrated chili mac. My husband and I had been talking about doing a proper camping trip for a while. Something out in nature, away from people, no cell service, no cars, no noise. Just trees, water, firewood, and stars. We picked Rock Island, Wisconsin, after hearing how remote and peaceful it was. No cars allowed, no bikes either. You have to take 2 ferries to even get there. First one from Door County to Washington Island, and then a second smaller boat from there to Rock Island. Felt like a trip back in time just getting there. No stores, no buildings, just a bunch of campsites, pit toilets, and some old stone ruins from early settlers. The place even had a lighthouse and 3 different cemeteries. That should have been enough of a red flag in hindsight. It was July. We had packed our backpacks with the essentials: tent, sleeping bags, water, cooking stuff, bug spray, and flashlights. We got to the island earlier in the afternoon, checked in at the little ranger station near the dock, then hiked to our site, which was a bit deeper into the woods. Our spot was quiet, tucked just a short walk from the shoreline. The weather was perfect, no wind, no clouds, just calm, still air. After setting up the tent and getting everything arranged, we made a small fire, cooked dinner, and just sat around, taking in the sounds of the island. No cars in the distance, no city buzz, just wind in the trees and the occasional squirrel or chipmunk rustling in the brush. Around 9 or so, the sky started to darken. The sun had already dipped past the lake and the stars started coming out in clusters. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was one of the clearest night skies I've ever seen. Thousands of stars, bright, sharp, not faded by any kind of light pollution. The Milky Way was just hanging there like a ribbon across the sky. We decided we had to walk out to the open field we passed earlier in the day, the one a quarter mile or so away from our campsite. It was open, flat, with just a few scattered trees, perfect for laying down and watching the sky. We grabbed our headlamps and a flashlight, zipped up our tent, and started walking down the trail. The air had cooled off a bit, and there was a dampness to it that you usually get near lakes. The trail was narrow and dark, lined with thick trees and brush on either side. After a couple minutes of walking, we came up on one of the cemeteries. You'd barely notice it during the day unless you were looking for it, but at night, even with a flashlight, it had a way of sneaking up on you. Old, mossy headstones crooked in the dirt, some of them barely sticking up from the ground. No fencing, no gates, just part of the woods now. We walked past it quietly, not saying anything, not because of fear or respect or anything, but because the whole trail just felt muted. It was so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat if you stood still. Maybe 10 or 15 steps past the cemetery, the fog started to come in. Not fast at first, just a little mist curling around our legs. It seemed weird because the weather had been perfect all day. No sign of fog earlier. Within a minute or two, it was getting heavier, rolling in fast, crawling low through the trees and across the trail. Our headlamps started to catch it in the beam, turning the light into this thick glowing soup that made it harder to see more than a few feet ahead. We kept walking, thinking it was just a weird weather change and it'd pass, or we'd get through it into clearer air in the field. But maybe halfway to the clearing, I saw something, just a tiny glint in the distance, a reflection like how animal eyes catch light. It was far off, maybe 20 feet into the brush, down a slight slope. At first I thought maybe it was just water or a dew-covered leaf reflecting our lights. But then it blinked. I stopped walking and just stared at it. And then it blinked again. That's when I started to get this weird feeling. My stomach got heavy, like a rock had dropped in it. Something about the way the fog was sitting, the silence, and that blinking, I just felt wrong. I tapped my husband's arm and pointed. He aimed his flashlight toward where I was looking, and then suddenly there were more. 3, maybe 4 more sets of eyes, low to the ground, glowing yellowish white in the beam. They weren't high up like deer eyes. They were low. They weren't moving either, just still watching. I couldn't hear anything. No crunching leaves, no breathing, no growling, no shuffling, just quiet and eyes. Then, like they had planned it, a few of the eyes shifted forward at once. I didn't wait. I just turned around and started jogging back toward camp. My feet were hitting the trail hard, slipping a bit on the gravel, and all I could hear now was my own breathing and the pounding of footsteps behind me. My husband was right behind me, yelling something, but it was lost in the sound of the blood rushing in my ears. The fog had thickened fast. It was like running through smoke. I could barely see a few feet ahead of me, and every shadow looked like something waiting to jump out. We got back to the edge of the cemetery, and I swear I could feel something behind us. Not breathing down our necks, but just close enough that the hair on my arms stood up. When we got past it and saw the soft glow of our campfire through the trees, it was like I could finally breathe again. We ran the last 100 feet to the site and just stood there, trying to catch our breath. The fire was still going, a low glow, and everything around our tent looked untouched. Quiet again. Still, we stood there for a while, both of us sweating and covered in fog dampness, just listening. No footsteps behind us, no sounds in the brush. After a few minutes, I grabbed the flashlight again and walked to the edge of our site, shining it into the woods. That's when I saw the first pair of eyes again, just past a fallen log. Then another pair, and another, blinking slowly. Turns out, Rock Island has a pretty healthy fox population. They're usually harmless, curious, and they tend to come out more in the evening, especially when people are cooking or walking around with lights. They're not aggressive or anything, but their eyes reflect like crazy in flashlights, and the fog must have made everything look way more intense than it actually was. There were at least 5 of them, maybe more, and they stayed just on the edge of the site for a bit before slipping back into the woods. We ended up sitting by the fire for a while, calming down, trying to laugh about it, but neither of us really could. Took a long time to settle down. Every little sound for the rest of the night made me jump. Twigs cracking, wind in the trees, even the distant call of some birds sounded sinister. We didn't go back to that field. We stayed close to the tent, zipped it up tight, and barely slept. Not because we were scared of the foxes, but because of how fast everything had shifted from calm to terrifying. It made us realize just how small we were out there, just 2 people in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by things we didn't fully understand. In the morning, it was like nothing had happened. Clear blue sky, warm sun, no sign of fog, no animals in sight. But we packed up and left early anyway. Didn't bother staying the extra day we'd planned. We didn't talk much on the ferry ride back. I think we both needed time to process how quickly our peaceful night turned into something we couldn't explain until later. It wasn't ghosts or spirits or anything like that, just animals doing what they do. But it reminded us that nature doesn't really care how ready you are. It just is. And sometimes that's more than enough to scare the hell out of you. We had planned the trip for months. It was our anniversary, and my wife and I wanted to do something a little different. Something quiet, away from people, just us and nature. So we booked a campsite about 3 hours away from home, a wooded area in the hills that was supposed to be peaceful and beautiful in mid-June. We packed everything carefully. The tent, sleeping bags, camp stove, cooler, food, supplies, everything we thought we might need for a week in the woods. I even packed a couple of thick ribeye steaks for the night of our anniversary. The forecast looked decent enough, just a bit of rain midweek, but nothing we couldn't handle. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon. The drive was smooth, no issues. We checked in at the little ranger station near the entrance to the campground. There was a piece of paper taped to the door with a printed warning. Bear activity reported. Please secure all food and scented items. That was it. Just a warning. I shrugged it off at first. Bears are always a risk in places like this. We were planning on doing everything right. Keeping the food in the car, no snacks left out, no toothpaste or soap inside the tent. I thought we'd be fine. What I didn't expect was that the bear wasn't just wandering through the woods. It was visiting our campsite like it was on a schedule. By the time we got everything set up, it was close to evening. We cooked a simple dinner, locked the cooler in the car, zipped up the tent, and tried to enjoy the quiet. Around 10 p.m., we were sitting near the fire when we heard something in the woods. Crunching leaves, heavy, slow steps. Then we saw it. A large black bear, not more than 30 feet away, just past the edge of the firelight. It didn't seem scared of us at all. It just moved through the trees, turned directly toward our campsite, and walked in like it owned the place. My wife froze. I stood up, trying to look big, heart pounding, but didn't move otherwise. The bear sniffed around near where the cooler had been, maybe expecting food. After a minute or two, it wandered off, back into the trees. That night, we slept in the car. No way were we sleeping in the tent with a bear nearby. The car wasn't comfortable. It was cramped, hot at first, then freezing around 3 a.m. We barely slept. The next morning, I walked down to the ranger station to report the bear and ask if we could move to another site. There were a bunch of other empty spots, but the guy just told me, "We're aware of the situation," and something vague about the bear being non-aggressive. I didn't push it. I should have, but I didn't. That night, we tried to be braver. We sat out by the fire again, a little more nervous this time. And just like before, almost like it was on a loop, the bear showed up again around the same time, same path, same direct line into our sight. Again, we locked ourselves in the car and waited until it left. We told ourselves maybe it wouldn't come back the next day. We clung to the idea that it had just been passing through. But the way it walked into our sight so specifically made it clear it knew this spot, maybe it had found food here before. It was too familiar. Tuesday was our anniversary. It started raining in the morning. At first, it wasn't too bad, just a light drizzle. We figured we'd stay inside the car, read, nap, maybe drive into town later. By the afternoon, it was pouring steadily. The ground turned to mud, and the tent was soaked through. Everything smelled wet. My shoes were damp. We didn't feel like cooking in the rain, so we drove into town and ate dinner at a hotel restaurant. Far from the romantic steak and fire evening I'd imagined. We went back to the campsite, got into the car, and tried to sleep again. I woke up early Wednesday morning. It was still raining, hard enough that I could hear it hammering the roof of the car. My toe felt like someone had stabbed it. I shifted around in the back seat, hoping it was just cramped or maybe I'd bumped it in my sleep. But the pain only got worse. I looked down and saw that the joint was red, swollen, and throbbing. Couldn't bend it. Even touching it lightly sent a jolt of pain up my leg. I got out of the car and limped through the rain toward the bathroom building. I thought walking it off might help. I sat on the covered bench outside the bathrooms, dripping wet, toe pulsing, and took out my phone. I had 1 bar of signal and 1 voicemail. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I played it, my stomach dropped. It was my stepmother. She said she'd taken my dad to the emergency room late the night before. He'd been having back pain for weeks, but it had gotten worse, and now they were worried it might be cancer. She didn't know anything else yet, just that he'd been admitted and they were running tests. I sat there in the rain, shivering, toe throbbing, listening to that message again and again. I didn't know what to do. I didn't even wake my wife right away. I just sat there, staring at the wall of trees behind the bathroom, everything gray and wet and miserable. I didn't want to cry, but I felt sick, like everything was wrong at once. Eventually, I hobbled back to the car and told my wife what was going on. She helped me pack up some of our stuff, and we drove into town to find an urgent care. They squeezed me in, looked at the toe and said it was an infection, gave me antibiotics and told me to rest and keep my foot elevated. But I couldn't walk without limping, and everything hurt. We went back to the campsite and just sat in the car for a while. I don't even remember talking. We were both silent. The rain kept falling. By that evening, we'd had enough. The bear, the rain, the pain, and now my dad possibly having cancer. It was too much. We packed everything up, even though most of it was wet. shoved the soaked tent into the trunk, piled muddy gear into the back seat. Didn't even bother trying to clean it off. We just wanted to leave. We started the long drive home late that night. My wife offered to drive, and I leaned the seat back and tried not to move my foot. The drive was long. The pain in my toe didn't let up. Every bump in the road felt like a jab of fire through my leg. We made it home the next morning, exhausted, sore, and emotionally drained. I went to my regular doctor a few days later, and that's when they told me it wasn't an infection, it was gout. I'd never had it before. Apparently, it can show up out of nowhere, and it just happened to pick that week. Perfect timing. My dad's test results came in a few days after we got home. It wasn't good. They found cancer in his spine, and he had to start treatment right away. That news hit harder than anything else. Everything else from that trip, every soaked sock, every hour spent curled in the back of the car, every time the bear walked into our sight, faded into the background after that. None of it mattered in comparison. We haven't gone camping since. We still talk about it sometimes, but it's always with a kind of bitter laugh. Our anniversary trip that turned into a slow-motion disaster. A bear that kept visiting like it was punching a time clock. Days of rain that soaked everything we owned. A foot that swelled up and wouldn't let me walk. And a phone call that changed the entire mood of our lives for weeks to come. It was supposed to be a quiet, relaxing getaway. A break from routine. Time for just the two of us. Instead, it became the worst trip we've ever had, and maybe the most unforgettable. We'd been planning that trip for months. My wife and I had both grown up hiking and camping in the Southeast, and we wanted our kids to experience it the way we had. Real, deep woods, not the kind of stuff you see from the highway. No noise, no light pollution, just us and the forest. We settled on the Cayuga Wilderness in northwest Georgia. Huge stretch of protected land, no cell service, no buildings, just miles of backcountry trails and campsites. It was warm that week, a typical southern summer. The days were hot and sweaty, but the nights were clear and surprisingly cool. You could hear every little thing in those woods. Coyotes far off, owls in the trees, bugs humming and buzzing constantly. It was our second night out there. We'd hiked in a few miles and found this flat clearing tucked behind a thick wall of pine trees. It was perfect, dry, shaded, and soft underfoot from decades of pine needles layering the ground. We pitched the tent in the center, laid out our sleeping pads and bags, and made a small fire just off to the side. My wife made dinner, the kids roasted marshmallows, and our dog, an older lab mix named Cody, kept busy sniffing everything in sight. That evening was beautiful, still warm, quiet. I remember thinking how peaceful it was. My wife had already tucked the kids into their sleeping bags, and I stayed out by the fire a little longer with Cody before finally climbing in. At some point during the night, I woke up. Not gradually, not to a dream or because I had to pee. I woke up like someone had thrown a bucket of ice water on me. My heart was already pounding. There was this moment, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, where I had no idea why I was awake. Just total confusion and this rising, primal fear in my chest. And then it happened. The crash. The boom. Like a bomb going off right next to the tent. It was the loudest, most violent sound I'd ever heard in the woods. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't an animal. It was the sound of a huge tree coming down. And not just falling, but tearing through the forest, ripping branches, shattering smaller trees, until it slammed into the ground with the stomach-dropping impact. It was maybe 15 feet from where we were sleeping. The ground actually shook. For a few seconds after that, all I could hear was cracking. Not just one crack, but dozens of them. Limbs, trunks, underbrush all snapping like bones. I didn't even realize it at the time, but I was frozen. Couldn't move, couldn't think. It was like my body had locked up. My wife was awake too. I could feel her body trembling next to me, but neither of us moved. I could hear the kids crying, Cody whimpering low and quiet, and all I could think was we were done. I honestly thought more trees were coming down and that there was no way we'd all get out in time. The whole forest sounded like it was collapsing. Then there were more crashes. Not as loud as the first one, but close. One to the left of us, another to the right. It was this weird, terrifying chain reaction. One tree takes down others as it falls. It was like watching dominoes tip over, except each one was massive and unpredictable and could kill you in an instant. You can't outrun that. You can't guess where the trees are going to land. There's no direction to run that feels safe. But then, nothing. Silence. No wind. No rustling. Just total, eerie silence. It was as if the whole forest had gone dead quiet. Even the insects stopped. I remember lying there, waiting, bracing for the next crash, expecting that at any second we were going to get crushed. I had my hand over my son's chest, just trying to keep him calm. Even though I was absolutely losing it inside, every muscle in my body was tight, like I was holding myself together by force. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds. It was hard to tell. My sense of time had completely warped, but the noise didn't come back. Nothing fell. Eventually, I turned on my headlamp. The beam flickered against the nylon of the tent, and I half expected to see branches or debris sticking through the sides, but everything looked intact. I unzipped the door slowly, dreading what I might find. I stepped out, barefoot and shaky. The air was heavy and still. My light hit the pine needles and cast these long, nervous shadows. Then I saw it. The tree, this enormous pine, maybe 80 feet tall, had crashed down just a few steps away from our tent. The base had snapped clean, looked like it had rotted from the inside, and it had fallen perfectly between two other trees, flattening a ton of undergrowth in its path. What shocked me even more was that the other trees it had hit had fallen too, like the impact knocked them out of balance, but they had landed in this weird V-shape around the original trunk. One to the left, one to the right. Nothing, not a single branch or twig had touched the tent. It was surreal, like someone had traced an outline around us and said, "Don't cross this line." The branches were all tangled and twisted just feet from where we'd been lying. One wrong angle, one more foot in any direction, and things could have ended very differently. Cody was out of the tent now, sniffing like crazy and pacing in small circles. I looked up at the remaining trees around us. Tall, thin pines swaying ever so slightly, but not a single breeze. I checked the sky, clear as ever, stars bright. No lightning, no storm, just still, dense quiet. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. My wife didn't either. The kids eventually dozed off again, probably from sheer exhaustion, but we lay there listening. Every tiny crack, every pop of a branch in the distance felt like another tree about to fall. I kept replaying the sound in my head, trying to figure out why it had fallen. Maybe rot, maybe a wind gust I didn't notice, maybe just age. But it didn't make sense that it happened on such a calm night. And the way the other trees fell, it felt too precise, too close, like they missed us on purpose. In the morning, I walked the area more thoroughly, took pictures, measured the distance from the tent to the trunks. 13 feet to the first impact point. 2 fallen trees angled like bookends around us. One had actually crushed the fire ring we used the night before. The rocks had been scattered and pushed into the dirt. If we had pitched the tent just a few feet farther to the right or left, we'd have been under it. No exaggeration. We packed up camp as fast as we could. No breakfast, no coffee. We just wanted out. The trail back felt longer than I remembered. I kept looking up at every tree, every branch, imagining them falling. It was like the fear had carved itself into my bones. I didn't feel safe again until we were in the car with the doors shut and the wheels moving. We've been camping since. We still love the woods, but I always check the trees now. I tap them with my boot, look for signs of rot or lean. I don't set up near tall dead trunks or soft ground, and I never assume it's just going to be a quiet night, because that was the most terrified I've ever been. Lying in a tent, unable to protect my family, just waiting to see if the forest would crush us or let us live. And for reasons I'll never fully understand, it let us live. Not even a twig touched us, but it could have. So easily could have.